we've talked about primitives and we've talked about objects just a little tiny bit, but as we enter a section on using objects, and we're going to use strings as one of our earlier examples, I wanted to give you some idea of what objects really are. By the end of this video, hopefully you'll feel comfortable using string methods. So there are methods that are associated with strings. You have seen most of these. The only ones that matter for the course are int, double, boolean, and char, but there are other primitive types. Objects, we've worked with strings. You've started to see a little bit with integer, like integer.parseInt. Remember in our number guessing game, and we were trying to take in a string as input and say, hey, I know this is a number. Can you just make it a number for me? So we used integer.parseInt. We've started using scanners. And now I'm going to just make up an object type called student and hopefully use that to explain to you what objects really are and how you use them. All right? So the most important thing you need to know about objects is that they are designed to group together two things. Two, okay? One, data. So you're thinking about different kinds of variables. So they group data together with methods that can be used on that data. Groups data with methods you can use on that data. So say we had an example with a student, right? So they could have an age that's an int, a string name, an int ID number. All of these things are data associated with a particular student. And then the student would be able to walk. Would be able to tell the student to walk, to sing, to take a test, all those things that students could do, albeit, maybe not well, but doesn't matter, right? Things you could ask a student to do. This class student is a blueprint for making an object of type student. So if I wanted to actually make an object of type student, an instance of a student object, I would create a new student. So I would say student, and I could pick, who should I pick? Who has a short name? So I made a new student named Ivy. She's a great student. I love this student. So I've made this new student named Ivy. Here's the name of my student object, right? Here's the type of the student object. Okay. And then over here, I've created a brand new student. So there's a brand new spot in memory to store a student. And that spot in memory is going to be referenced by Ivy. So this part makes a new student object using the student blueprint. So when it goes to make this Ivy object, it'll come up with values, and we'll probably pass them in here, but for now, it's going to make a student object that can store an age, a name, and an ID number, right? And then on this object named Ivy, right? On this student object named Ivy, with these particular characteristics, we can ask Ivy to do these things. We can say, hey, Ivy, could you walk? And off she'd go. All right? Ivy, walk. So right here, this is the method name. So this part is the name of the object. Name of object. And the second part, after the dot, right? Dot something, this is the method name. And we're going to use this to work with strings now, okay? Because there is a string class that has a lot of different methods in it. And you can tell strings to do a variety of things. So that's what we're going to talk about next. All right. So let's imagine that class string. So it's going to group the data, like the strings that you store. So let's say I create a string named word and I store the value silly inside of word. So it's going to group this string, that data, with a whole bunch of different methods that work on that data. So I could ask for like the length of my string and it would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's 5 long, right? So there are things that I might want to do with my string. Now you'll notice here it doesn't say new string, and strings are weird in the world of objects. They're used so often, Java makes it easier to set them up than other objects, so it plays a little bit fast and loose with them. So some of the rules are a little weird, but mostly it's going to use the stuff that we're talking about for objects. Okay, so you've created a string word and you've put silly into it, right? You could check to see if the string silly was equal to, we've done this, to what's stored in Word. And that would be true, right? And you could check the same way that word.equals, whoops, not the S, word.equals silly. And that would also be true. Do you remember, I don't know if you remember, because we haven't talked about why this is, but now's a good time. If I do this, silly equals word, this actually comes out as false. We have said not to use double equals with objects. And here's what's happening. When you create Word, it creates a spot in memory to store the object, right? And Word holds a memory address that points at that. So if you look at this, it says, hey, silly, does it equal Word? It does exactly what you think it does. But when you get down here, it's looking at the memory address of Word and this new silly string that you put somewhere, right? This is a brand new one. And it says, hey, there's this new silly object, right? And I want to compare it to Word. And it turns out those two are not stored in the same memory address. So this does not work. So when they created the string class, they created an equals method that would allow you to compare two objects of string to see if they're the same. Okay. Lots of objects have a dot equals method. And if this part is confusing as to why this doesn't work, I'm going to explain this lots more over the next month. So this is just an introduction to that. So if you wanted to compare whether two strings were the same, you would make sure you use dot equals. All right? Use that method. Now we're going to talk about all these other methods. There are notes, they're listed in class resources. So if you want to pause the video right now and grab those notes so you can scroll along with me, that'd work, okay?